They say an alpha king can survive anything except watching his fated mate walk away believing he chose another woman over her. King Kaelthorn Veyros learned that truth the night his empire began to die. The night Selene Ravaren disappeared with his secret claiming mark burned into her skin and his twins growing inside her womb, he felt his soul start to crack. What she didn't see was the terror in his eyes. The silent scream of a man trapped inside his own body by blood magic so ancient it had been forgotten for centuries. If you want to know how a king destroys his own kingdom trying to find the woman who was never supposed to leave, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment your city below so I know my pack is listening. The Great Hall of Velmora stank of lies that night. Selene Ravaren stood perfectly still among the lesser nobles, her spine straight as iron, watching King Kaelthorn Veyros place the crown on another woman's head. The golden circlet caught the torchlight. Lady Morelle Ashvorn smiled like she'd swallowed the sun itself. The crowd erupted. Wolves howled their approval. Goblets raised high. Selene felt nothing but the burn. The claiming mark beneath her gown throbbed hot against her ribs, where Kaelthorn had pressed his mouth 3 nights ago in the tower room overlooking the Black Forest. His canines had punctured deep. The bond had snapped into place so hard she'd tasted copper and starlight. He'd whispered her name like a prayer while his hands mapped every inch of her skin. Mine, he'd said. Always mine. Now he stood 20 feet away, crowning someone else. Her fingers dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood. The twins in her belly hadn't started showing yet, but she could feel them. 2 heartbeats tangled with hers. 2 futures she'd imagined in the dark hours before dawn when Kaelthorn held her and promised things that turned out to be smoke. Nobody looked at her. Why would they? She was minor nobility from a border house. Pretty enough to bed, but not enough to wed. That's what her mother had warned her. That's what she'd refused to believe. Fool. The king's voice carried across the hall as he addressed his new queen. Formal, distant, every word a blade. Selene memorized the sound because she'd never hear it again after tonight. She turned and walked toward the side exit, slow, controlled, 1 foot in front of the other like she wasn't bleeding out from the inside. A few nobles glanced her way, but their attention slid off just as quick. She was already forgotten. The corridor outside was blessedly empty. She pressed her back against the cold stone and let herself shake for exactly 30 seconds. That's all she'd allow. 30 seconds to feel the full weight of her shattered future before she locked it away forever. Then she straightened and headed for her chambers. The claiming mark pulsed with each step, a reminder, a brand, a promise that had curdled into poison. Her maid Tessa was waiting in the room, wide-eyed and anxious. The girl had been with her since childhood and could read Selene's face better than anyone. "Pack your things," Selene said quietly. "We're leaving before dawn." Tessa's hands flew to her mouth. "My lady, you can't." "I can. I will. Get the travel chest, but the king made his choice. Now I'm making mine." Her voice came out steady as stone even though her hands trembled when she reached for the wardrobe. She pulled out riding clothes. Leather pants, wool tunic, boots meant for distance, not decoration. She stripped off the silk gown she'd worn to watch her future die and changed into something that could survive the road. Tessa moved mechanically, folding clothes and packing supplies. "Where will we go?" "Anywhere that isn't here." "The border villages?" Selene nodded. "Far enough that news travels slow, small enough to disappear." She caught her reflection in the silver mirror above the washing basin. Same dark hair, same gray eyes that Kaelthorn used to say looked like storm clouds before rain. Same face he'd kissed 1,000 times. Nothing looked different. Everything was destroyed. She turned away and focused on the practical details of vanishing. Money sewn into the lining of her cloak. Herbs and medicines in small pouches. The dagger her father gave her before he died tucked into her boot. Tessa worked in silence for several minutes before she finally spoke again. "Does he know?" "About what?" The girl's eyes dropped to Selene's still flat stomach. "No. And he never will. My lady, don't. Just don't." Selene couldn't afford sympathy right now. Sympathy would crack her open and she needed to stay whole long enough to get out of this palace alive. She grabbed the leather satchel and started loading it with everything she could carry. Not much, just enough. The claiming mark burned hotter. She pressed her palm against it through the fabric of her tunic and felt the pull. The bond trying to drag her back toward him even now, even after what he'd done. It didn't care about betrayal or broken promises. It just wanted what it wanted. Well, it could go to hell. She'd heard stories about wolves who rejected their fated mates, how the bond turned septic, how it ate them alive from the inside. She figured she'd earned a little suffering. At least it would be hers to control. Tessa finished with the travel chest and looked up. What about Lady Morel? What about her? Do you think she knows? About you and the king? Selene laughed, and it came out sharp enough to cut. If she knew, she wouldn't be smiling like that. She thinks she won something. Maybe she did. Maybe. Or maybe she just inherited a crown attached to a dead man walking. The words tasted like ash, but Selene meant them. She'd felt the bond snap into place. She knew what it meant when an alpha found his true mate. Kaelthorn could pretend all he wanted, but his wolf would destroy him for this eventually. Nature didn't forgive that kind of rejection. Good. Let him suffer the way she was suffering. Let him wake up every morning knowing he threw away the one thing that could have saved him. She grabbed the last of her things and nodded to Tessa. Time to go. They moved through the palace like ghosts. The celebration was still raging in the Great Hall, and most of the staff had abandoned their posts to watch. Nobody stopped them. Nobody even noticed. Selene had spent 3 months learning every hidden passage and servants' corridor in this place. She'd mapped escape routes without even knowing why. Some part of her must have sensed this was coming. They reached the stables without incident. The horses barely stirred when Selene saddled 2 of them. She picked the fastest mares in the royal stable and didn't feel even a flicker of guilt. Kaelthorn owed her a hell of a lot more than horses. Tessa climbed onto her mount and looked down. Are you sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They rode out through the eastern gate just as the first gray light touched the horizon. The guards were too drunk or distracted to question 2 women in travel cloaks. By the time anyone realized Lady Selene Ravarin had vanished, she'd be 3 villages away and moving fast. The claiming mark throbbed with every mile. She ignored it. The twins shifted inside her like they could feel her distress. She pressed her hand to her stomach and made them a promise in the silence of her own mind. I'll keep you safe, no matter what it costs. You'll never know what he did to us. The road stretched ahead into unfamiliar territory. Behind her, the palace of Velmora disappeared into morning mist. Selene didn't look back. Okay. 3 months later, the kingdom started dying. It happened slowly at first. A blight in the northern fields that shouldn't have spread but did. Rivers running lower than they had in decades. Livestock going mad and attacking their handlers. Small things that added up to something wrong. King Kaelthorn Veiros felt every bit of it, like a sickness crawling through his veins. He stood in the council chamber staring at reports that made no sense. His advisors argued in circles about weather patterns and crop rotation, and none of them understood what was really happening. The kingdom was dying because he was dying, and he was dying because she was gone. His wolf had been howling inside his skull for 93 days straight. 93 days since Selene disappeared. 93 days since he'd woken up the morning after the choosing ceremony and felt the bond stretched thin and screaming across impossible distance. She'd run. Of course she'd run. She thought he'd betrayed her. His hands clenched on the edge of the table hard enough that the wood cracked. One of his counselors stopped mid-sentence and stared. Your Majesty, get out. The man blinked. Sire, we haven't finished. I said, get out, all of you. They scrambled for the door like rabbits fleeing a wolf. Smart. Kaelthorn was barely holding on to his human form these days. The shift kept trying to take him at random moments. His canines had elongated twice during morning court. His eyes bled gold when he got angry. The control he'd spent 30 years building was shredding apart. The door closed behind the last counselor, and Kaelthorn let himself sag against the table. Every muscle hurt. Every breath felt like sucking down glass. The bond was still there, but it had turned vicious. Instead of warmth and connection, it just fed him pain and distance. She was alive. That much he knew. If she died, he would have felt it. The bond would have snapped clean and probably taken him with it. But she wasn't coming back. He'd sent search parties in every direction, offered rewards, threatened noble houses, turned over every rock from the capital to the border territories. Nobody had seen her. It was like she'd stepped off the edge of the world. His new queen swept into the room without knocking. Lady Morel Ashvorn wore the crown like she'd been born to it. Her smile was poisoned honey. "My king, you missed the afternoon petitions again." Kaelthorn didn't look at her. "I'm busy." "You've been busy for 3 months. People are starting to talk." "Let them talk." She moved closer and he caught her scent. Perfume and ambition. It turned his stomach. She'd been trying to touch him since the wedding, and he'd avoided her at every turn. The marriage was political, necessary, completely hollow, not his choice. Never his choice. Morel's hand landed on his shoulder and he jerked away like she'd burned him. "Don't." Her smile tightened. "I'm your wife. On paper. We were married in front of the entire kingdom. Doesn't make you my mate." The word came out savage and Morel actually stepped back. Her mask slipped for just a second and he saw real fear underneath. Good. She should be afraid. She should be terrified of what she'd helped orchestrate. She recovered quickly, lifted her chin. "The kingdom needs an heir, Kaelthorn. Then find another king." He walked past her toward the balcony. The city spread out below him. Velmora, the jewel of the northern territories, his birthright and his prison. It was crumbling. He could see it in the way the streets seemed darker, the way people moved through the markets with their heads down. Fear had settled over the capital like fog. They could feel it too, even if they didn't understand the source. Their king was breaking and the land was breaking with him. Morel's voice followed him. "If you're looking for that border rat you were rutting, you should stop. She's not coming back." Kaelthorn's vision went red. He spun and crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. Morel's back hit the wall hard enough to knock the breath out of her. His hand wrapped around her throat. Not squeezing, just holding. A promise of what he could do if she pushed him 1 inch further. "Say her name again," he whispered. "I dare you." Morel's eyes went wide. Her pulse hammered against his palm. "You think you won something," Kaelthorn continued. "You think that crown makes you powerful. But you're nothing. You were a pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing, and when I figure out who moved you into position, I'm going to burn them all to ash. Understood?" She managed a tiny nod. He released her and stepped back. "Get out of my sight." Morel fled. Kaelthorn returned to the balcony and gripped the stone railing. His whole body shook with the effort of not shifting, not hunting, not tearing the palace apart brick by brick until he found answers. Something had happened that night. The choosing ceremony was supposed to be a formality. He'd already decided on Selene, already claimed her in private, already felt the bond lock into place. He was going to announce it publicly and crown her in front of everyone. But then he'd woken up on the dais with Morel beside him and a crown already placed and no memory of how he'd gotten there. Blood magic. It was the only explanation. Someone had controlled him, forced him to crown the wrong woman, while his wolf screamed inside a cage of ancient power. By the time he'd broken free enough to understand what had happened, the damage was done. Selene was gone. The bond was shredded. His kingdom was bleeding out. He'd put his best trackers on finding the source of the spell. So far they'd turned up nothing. Whoever had done this knew how to cover their tracks. But Kaelthorn would find them eventually. And when he did, he'd make sure they understood exactly what it meant to trap an Alpha King inside his own body and force him to destroy the one thing he'd ever wanted. Selene pressed her hands against the small of her back and stretched. 6 months pregnant, and the twins were making their presence known. Her belly had swelled faster than she'd expected. Faster than normal, according to the village healer who'd examined her last week. Strong bloodline, the old woman had said. Powerful father. Selene had smiled and said nothing. She'd settled in a border village called Thornwick 3 months ago, small enough to avoid attention, remote enough that news from the capital took weeks to arrive. The people here didn't ask questions. They accepted her story about being a widow traveling to stay with family. The cottage she'd rented was barely standing, but it had a roof and a hearth and windows that faced the forest. She'd set up a healing practice. Turned out minor nobility got decent education in herbs and medicine. The villagers paid her in bread and eggs and firewood. It was nothing like the palace. It was survival. Tessa appeared in the doorway with a basket of vegetables from the market. "You should be resting. I'm not an invalid. You're carrying 2 babies the size of wolf pups. Sit down before you fall down." Selene lowered herself into the wooden chair by the hearth. Her body felt foreign these days, swollen and heavy and marked by things she didn't understand. The claiming mark had changed. Instead of the simple bite scar it had been, golden symbols had started appearing around it. She'd hidden it at first, wore high-necked dresses and kept the shutters closed when she bathed. But the marks kept spreading. They'd crept up her ribs, across her collarbone, down her arms in delicate spiraling patterns that looked like ancient script. When she touched them, they felt warm. When she concentrated, she could almost read them. The village healer had gasped when she'd seen them during the examination. "Bondfire script," the old woman had whispered. "I've only seen it in books. It was supposed to be lost. What does it mean?" "It means you're bound to someone powerful enough to wake the old magic. Someone royal." Selene had paid the woman extra to keep her mouth shut. Now she sat by the fire and traced the golden marks with her fingertips. They'd spread to her hands overnight, delicate lines that wrapped around her wrists like jewelry, beautiful and terrifying. The twins kicked hard enough to make her gasp. "Easy," she murmured. "Your mama's not going anywhere." That was a lie. She was planning to move again before the babies came. Thornwick was safe, but it wouldn't stay that way forever. Eventually someone would notice. Eventually word would spread about the woman with gold marks who appeared out of nowhere carrying twins. She had maybe a month before she needed to disappear again. Tessa set the vegetables on the table and started chopping. "Any news from the capital?" "Same as always, the kingdom's falling apart." It had been the talk of every market and tavern for months. Crops failing, rivers drying up, wolves turning feral and attacking villages. King Kaelthorn had apparently abandoned most of his diplomatic responsibilities and was tearing through the countryside looking for something. Looking for someone, Tessa had corrected quietly. Selene didn't want to think about that. She didn't want to wonder if he'd figured out what happened. If he was searching for her specifically or just trying to fix whatever magical disaster had forced him to crown Morel. It didn't matter either way. She was done with kings and crowns and bonds that were supposed to mean forever, but shattered at the first test. The golden marks pulsed warm against her skin. She ignored them and focused on the practical details of staying hidden. She'd need supplies for the birth, clean linens, sharp knives, herbs to stop bleeding. Tessa was brave, but not trained in midwifery. Selene would have to handle most of it herself. Twin births were dangerous even with help. She pushed the fear down and locked it away with all the other things she couldn't afford to feel. Outside, the sun was setting. Orange light spilled through the windows and painted everything gold. For just a moment, the cottage felt almost peaceful, almost safe. Then she felt it, a pull so strong it nearly yanked her out of the chair. The bond had been quiet for months, distant and cold like a severed limb. But now it surged to life with brutal intensity. Heat flooded through her chest. Her heart started racing. The claiming mark burned so hot she cried out. Tessa dropped the knife. "My lady, what's wrong?" "He's close." "Who?" "The king." Selene didn't know how she knew, but she was certain. Kaelthorn was nearby. Maybe in the village, maybe closer. The bond was screaming his proximity loud enough to drown out every other sense. She struggled to her feet. "We have to leave. Now." Tessa stared at her. "You can't travel like this. You're 6 months. I don't care. Pack what we can carry and saddle the horses. But now, Tessa." The girl ran. Selene grabbed her cloak and threw it over her shoulders. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the clasp. The twins were going wild inside her, kicking and rolling like they could feel their father's nearness. She stumbled toward the door and froze. A figure stood in the road outside her cottage. Tall, broad-shouldered, eyes that burned gold even in the dying light. King Kaelthorn Veyros looked like he'd crawled through hell to get here. His clothes were torn and muddy. His hair hung loose past his shoulders. Stubble covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that made Selene's breath catch. They were wild, desperate, completely unhinged. He took one step toward her cottage, then another. The bond pulled so hard she gasped. Kaelthorn stopped 10 feet from her door. His voice came out wrecked. "Selene." She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stand there while 6 months of buried pain rose up like a flood. He looked at her belly, at the obvious swell of pregnancy. Something cracked across his face that might have been anguish or relief or both. When he spoke again, his voice barely qualified as human. "You were never abandoned. I have been dying since the moment you disappeared." The golden marks on Selene's skin burst into light, and the world exploded into fire. The golden light exploded outward from Selene's skin like a star breaking open. Kaelthorn staggered back. The force of it hit him square in the chest and drove him to his knees. Every nerve ending in his body caught fire. The bond that had been screaming for 6 months suddenly roared to life with enough power to crack the earth beneath them. He looked up through the blaze and saw her. Selene stood in the doorway of that rotting cottage with her hand pressed to her swollen belly and gold flames crawling up her arms. The claiming mark on her ribs burned so bright he could see it through her clothes. Ancient script covered every inch of exposed skin, symbols he recognized from stories his grandmother told him before she died. Bondfire, the lost magic that only activated when a true mate bond was strong enough to wake the old bloodlines. His wolf howled triumph inside his skull. She's alive, she's here, she's ours. Selene's face twisted with something between rage and terror. Her voice cut through the light like a blade. Get away from me! Kaelthorn tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The magic held him pinned. Every cell in his body was screaming to get closer while the power radiating off her kept him locked in place 10 feet away. I can explain, he rasped. Explain what? How you crowned another woman after you claimed me? How you left me carrying your children while you played king with someone else? The twins. He'd suspected, but hearing her confirm it nearly stopped his heart. His gaze dropped to her belly again. 6 months. The timeline matched. She'd been pregnant when she ran, and she'd spent half a year hiding from him while his kingdom collapsed. That wasn't me. Her laugh came out broken. I watched you do it. I stood in that hall and watched you put a crown on her head and smile like I never existed. I was trapped. Convenient. It's the truth. Then why did it take you 6 months to find me? Because you disappeared like smoke, and I've been tearing the kingdom apart looking for you. The golden light pulsed brighter. Selene's hands were shaking. Her breathing came fast and shallow. The twins must have been kicking because she winced and pressed harder against her stomach. Kaelthorn's instinct to protect surged so strong he nearly broke through the magical barrier. She needed to sit down. She needed water and safety and someone to take care of her because she looked like she was about to shatter. You should have stayed hidden, Selene said quietly. You should have left me alone. I couldn't. Why not? You already have a wife, a kingdom, everything you wanted. I have nothing without you. Stop. It's true. I said stop. Her voice cracked on the last word and the golden flames flickered. For just a second, he saw past the anger to the pain underneath. She'd been carrying this for 6 months. The betrayal, the abandonment, the weight of 2 babies and a bond that wouldn't let her forget him no matter how far she ran. Kaelthorn forced himself to stay still, even though every instinct demanded he go to her. She was in control of the bonfire right now. If he pushed too hard, she might burn them both alive and not even realize it until the ashes settled. He gentled his voice. Let me explain what happened. Then if you want me gone, I'll leave. You'll leave. Yes. You swear it. On my life. Selene stared at him for a long moment. The golden light slowly dimmed. Not gone, but banked. Waiting. She lowered herself onto the wooden step outside the cottage door like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Talk fast, she said, before I change my mind. Kaelthorn took a breath and told her everything. The choosing ceremony had been planned for weeks. He'd already decided to name Selene as his queen, already made the arrangements, already had the crown resized to fit her head. The night before the ceremony, he'd claimed her in private because he couldn't wait any longer. The bond had snapped into place, and he'd felt complete for the first time in his life. Then he'd woken up on the dais with Morel beside him, and no memory of how he'd gotten there. Selene's eyes narrowed. No memory. None. One moment I was in my chambers getting ready. The next I was standing in front of the entire kingdom crowning a woman I barely knew. That's not possible. It is if someone used blood magic strong enough to control an alpha king. Her hand went to her throat. Who would do that? I don't know yet, but I have trackers working on it. For 6 months. Yes. And you still don't know. Kaelthorn's jaw tightened. Whoever did this knows how to hide. They used magic that hasn't been seen in centuries. It takes time to unravel. Selene looked away. The golden marks on her skin had faded to a dull glow, but they were still visible. spiraling patterns that marked her as his in a way that went deeper than politics or crowns. "Even if I believed you," she said slowly, "it doesn't change anything. You're married to her. You're bound by law. Not by choice, still bound. I'll annul it. You can't just annul a royal marriage. The council would never allow it. Then I'll burn the council to ash and rule alone." The words came out savage and final. Kaelthorn meant every syllable. He'd spent 6 months watching his kingdom die because the bond was broken. He'd abandoned diplomacy and duty and every responsibility he'd ever held in pursuit of the woman sitting 10 feet away from him, looking like she wanted to believe him but couldn't afford to. If she sent him away now, he'd probably last another month before his wolf tore through what was left of his sanity and destroyed everything in reach. Selene must have seen something in his face because her expression shifted. The anger bled away and left something that looked almost like fear. "You look terrible," she said. "I feel worse. When did you last sleep?" He couldn't remember. Time had stopped meaning much after she disappeared. He'd functioned on instinct and desperation. Sleep was something that happened to other people. "Kaelthorn," she said, and hearing his name in her voice nearly undid him. He looked up. "If someone really did control you," she continued carefully, "then we have bigger problems than an annulment. I know. Because if they could force you to crown the wrong queen once, they could force you to do other things. Worse things. I know. And if they're still out there, they are. Then we're all in danger." Kaelthorn nodded slowly. She was right. Whoever had orchestrated the choosing ceremony had demonstrated power that shouldn't exist anymore. Blood magic on that scale required sacrifice, planning, resources that only came from noble houses with old bloodlines and dangerous ambitions. 3 houses had raised armies in the last month, all of them claiming loyalty to Mirelle, all of them pushing for her coronation to be made permanent while Kaelthorn was distracted. Civil war was coming whether he wanted it or not, and now Selene was caught in the middle of it, carrying his heirs and marked by magic that made her a target for anyone who understood what the Bondfire meant. He'd found her just in time to pull her into the path of something that might destroy them all. "Come back with me," he said. Selene's head snapped up. "What?" "To Velmora. Come back to the capital where I can protect you." "Absolutely not." "Selene, I'm not walking back into that nest of snakes while I'm pregnant and vulnerable." "Are you insane?" "Probably. That's not funny. I'm not joking." Kaelthorn pushed himself to his feet. The golden barrier had dissolved enough that he could move again. He took one careful step toward her, then another. She didn't run, so he kept going until he was standing at the base of the cottage steps looking up at her. This close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the way her hands trembled when she wasn't actively controlling them, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She'd been surviving alone for 6 months while carrying twins that were probably inheriting enough power to make pregnancy dangerous even under the best circumstances. His chest tightened. "You can't stay here," he said quietly. "It's not safe. It's safer than your palace." "Not anymore. If I found you, others can too. Then I'll move again." "To where?" "How many times can you run before the twins come and you can't travel anymore?" Selene's mouth compressed into a thin line. She knew he was right, even if she hated it. Kaelthorn took advantage of her silence to press forward. "The kingdom is dying, Selene. Fields are rotting. Rivers are drying up. Wolves are turning feral. It started the night you left and it's getting worse. That's not my fault. I didn't say it was." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because you need to understand what's at stake. The bond between us isn't just personal. It's tied to the land, to the bloodline. When you disappeared, it broke something fundamental, and now the whole empire is paying the price." Her eyes widened. "That's not possible. It shouldn't be, but the Bondfire doesn't follow normal rules. Look at yourself." He gestured to the golden marks covering her skin. "This is ancient magic," he continued, "the kind that connects rulers to their territory. When a true bond forms between an alpha king and his mate, it stabilizes the kingdom. When it breaks, everything falls apart." "Yes." Selene looked down at her hands, at the delicate script wrapping around her wrists and fingers. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "So you're saying if I don't come back with you, the kingdom dies?" "I'm saying if we don't fix this bond, neither of us survives, kingdom or not." The silence stretched between them. Tessa appeared in the cottage doorway behind Selene. The girl looked terrified but determined. She'd probably heard everything. Her loyalty to Selene was absolute, and Kaelthorn made a mental note to reward her properly when this was over. If he survived long enough for there to be an after. Selene finally looked up. Her gray eyes met his, and he saw the exact moment she made her decision. "I'm not going back as your hidden mistress," she said. "I'm not sneaking around while Morel plays queen. You won't have to, and I'm not letting anyone take my children. They're mine too, biologically. But I'm the one who's been carrying them while you were busy losing a kingdom." The accusation hit harder than a physical blow. Kaelthorn absorbed it without flinching because she'd earned the right to draw blood. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Honesty. You have it, proof that you didn't choose her. I'm working on it, and a guarantee that when we walk into that palace, I'm not walking into a trap." Kaelthorn held out his hand, palm up. An offer and a promise. "Touch me," he said. "What? If you touch me, the bond will show you everything. You'll feel what I felt, see what I saw, know whether I'm lying or telling the truth." Selene stared at his outstretched hand like it was a venomous snake. "The Bondfire allows it," Kaelthorn continued. "It's raw, it's invasive, but it doesn't lie. And if I see something I don't like, then you'll know for certain and you can make your choice from there." Her hand lifted slowly, hesitated. The golden marks on her skin began to glow brighter as she got closer to touching him. Kaelthorn held perfectly still. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was the moment. Either she believed him or everything he'd fought for in the last 6 months meant nothing. Selene's fingers brushed against his palm. The world exploded. Not with light this time, but with sensation. The bond roared open like a dam breaking. 6 months of separation and agony flooded through the connection all at once. Kaelthorn felt himself falling into her mind and dragging her into his. He saw what she'd seen, the night of the choosing ceremony from her perspective, standing in the crowd watching him crown Morel. The devastation on her face, the way she'd held herself together by sheer force of will until she reached her chambers and finally let herself break. The weeks after, hiding in villages, selling her jewelry for food, waking up sick every morning while Tessa held her hair back. The moment she felt the twins quicken, the terror of realizing she was bringing children into a world where their father had abandoned them. Every bit of pain she'd carried, every moment she'd survived alone. Kaelthorn felt it all and wanted to die. Then she saw what he'd seen, the choosing ceremony from inside the trap, waking up on the dais with no memory of how he'd gotten there. The sick horror of realizing what his body had done while his mind was locked away, feeling the bond stretch and scream as Selene fled. The months after, tearing through the countryside like a mad thing, threatening nobles, burning resources, watching his kingdom crumble while his wolf howled for the mate who'd vanished. The moment he'd finally tracked her scent to this village and followed it to this cottage. The relief of seeing her alive, the agony of seeing her pregnant and terrified. The absolute certainty that he would burn the world down before he let anyone hurt her again. Selene gasped and yanked her hand back. The connection severed. They both staggered. Kaelthorn caught himself on the step railing. Selene grabbed the door frame. Their eyes met, and he saw the truth written all over her face. She believed him now. She'd felt the trap, the helplessness, the rage at being controlled. But she'd also felt everything else. The obsession, the possessiveness, the absolute refusal to let her go, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. Some women might have been frightened by that level of intensity. Selene just looked tired. "You really are dying," she said. "Yes. Because of me. Because of us." She pressed both hands to her belly. The twins were moving. Kaelthorn could see the ripple of motion beneath her clothes. His children. His blood. Growing inside the woman who held his entire future in her hands. "If I go back with you," Selene said slowly, "things change." Agreed. Morel loses the crown. She never deserved it. The people who did this get punished, publicly. And I'm not some political pawn you parade around for legitimacy. Never. I need real power, not the decorative kind. You'll have it. Swear it. Kaelthorn met her eyes. "I swear on the bond between us, on the lives of our children, and on every drop of blood in my body that if you come back with me, you will never be powerless again." The golden marks flared one more time. Selene took a shaking breath and nodded. Fine. We leave at dawn. Kaelthorn felt something in his chest unlock for the first time in 6 months. The bond settled, not healed, but no longer actively tearing him apart. Relief hit him so hard his knees almost gave out. He wanted to grab her, pull her close, bury his face in her hair and never let go. But she was still scared, still angry, still carrying wounds that wouldn't close just because they'd agreed to a truce, so he just nodded and stepped back to give her space. Tessa, Selene called over her shoulder. Yes, my lady? Pack everything we own. We're going to need it. The girl disappeared into the cottage. Selene turned back to Kaelthorn. Where are your men? Camped outside the village. I came alone. Of course you did. I didn't want to scare you. Her eyebrow lifted. You showed up at my door looking like death incarnate and exploded my survival instinct. I'd say the fear ship already sailed. Fair. How many soldiers did you bring? 50. To a border village? I wasn't sure what I'd find. Could have been a trap. And if it was, then whoever said it would learn why you don't corner an alpha king looking for his mate. The threat in those words was absolute. Selene must have heard it because something shifted in her expression. Not quite approval, but close enough. We'll need more, she said. More what? Soldiers. If we're riding back into a civil war, I want an army at my back, not a scouting party. I can summon reinforcements once we're on the road. Do it tonight. And Kaelthorn? He looked at her. If anyone tries to take these children from me, I'll burn them alive with Bondfire and sleep like a baby afterward. Understood? Understood. Good. She turned and walked into the cottage without looking back. Kaelthorn stood in the gathering dark and let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. She'd agreed. She was coming back. The bond was stabilizing. But they were riding straight into a war zone with enemies who'd already proven they could control him once. And now Selene was marked by ancient magic that made her valuable to anyone who understood what the Bondfire represented. Powerful enough to wake dead bloodlines. Powerful enough to save a kingdom or destroy it. He'd found his mate just in time to put her directly in the path of every threat that wanted him dead. Kaelthorn looked up at the darkening sky and made himself a promise. Whoever had done this was going to pay. Not just with their life, with everything they'd ever loved. And when he was done, there wouldn't be enough left of them to bury Bresson. They rode through the night. Selene sat her horse better than Kaelthorn expected for someone 6 months pregnant. She didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, just kept her eyes forward and her hands steady on the reins, while 50 of his best soldiers formed a protective ring around her. Tessa rode beside her, looking half terrified and half defiant. Kaelthorn stayed close enough to intervene if anything went wrong, but far enough to give Selene space. The bond hummed between them. Stable for now, but still fragile, like a bone that had been broken and set but hadn't fully healed. They made camp around midnight. His second in command, a grizzled wolf named Gareth, approached while soldiers set up tents. Your Majesty, we received word from the capital. Kaelthorn didn't look away from where Selene was dismounting with Tessa's help. What word? 3 more houses declared for Queen Morelle. They're mobilizing. Of course they are. The council is demanding your return. They can demand all they want. Sire, if we don't move fast, then they'll learn that councils serve at the pleasure of the king, not the other way around. Gareth glanced towards Selene. Is it true? About the bonfire? Yes. The old magic shouldn't be possible. And yet, if the nobles find out, they will. That's why we're bringing an army. Gareth was silent for a moment. Then, quietly, is she worth a civil war? Kaelthorn finally looked at his second. His eyes had gone full gold. His voice dropped to something barely human. Ask me that again, and I'll rip your throat out where you stand. Gareth took a step back. Hands raised. Peace, brother. I meant no disrespect. Then choose your words more carefully. The soldier nodded and retreated. Kaelthorn forced himself to breathe, to pull back the wolf that wanted to tear into anyone who questioned Selene's value. The control he'd maintained for 30 years was shredded. Every protective instinct was running at full volume. He needed to get it together before they reached the capital, or he'd be useless in a fight. Selene appeared at his elbow. She'd changed into warmer traveling clothes and pulled her hair back in a braid. The golden marks were mostly hidden, but he could see them peeking above her collar. Your men don't trust me, she said. They don't know you. They think I'm going to get them killed. You might. She actually laughed. Points for honesty. I'm not going to lie to you, Selene. This is going to be dangerous. If you want to turn back, I don't. Even knowing what's waiting for us, especially knowing. She looked up at him and he saw steel in her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. She'd spent half a year surviving on her own, learning to be hard, learning that the world didn't care about fairness or love or bonds that were supposed to be unbreakable. She'd become someone who could walk into a war and come out the other side. Kaelthorn felt something close to pride. Get some rest, he said. We ride hard tomorrow. What about you? I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. I need you safe more. Selene studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his arm. Just a brief contact, barely anything. The bond sang. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming to find me. Then she walked away before he could respond. Kaelthorn stood in the dark and tried to remember the last time someone had thanked him for anything. Kings didn't get gratitude. They got demands and expectations and endless pressure to be something inhuman. But Selene had just looked at him like he was a person worth saving. He'd burn 1,000 kingdoms to keep that expression on her face. The night stretched long. Kaelthorn didn't sleep. He walked the perimeter, checked the guards, kept his senses alert for any sign of threat. Around 3 a.m, he felt the bond pull tight. He followed it to Selene's tent. She was awake, sitting on the bedroll with her knees drawn up as much as her belly would allow. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. Kaelthorn ducked inside without asking permission. What's wrong? The twins. They won't stop kicking. Is that normal? I don't know. I'm not exactly an expert on pregnancies involving royal alpha bloodlines. He knelt beside her. Can I? She nodded. Kaelthorn placed his hand on her swollen belly. The twins kicked immediately, hard enough that he felt it through her clothes. His wolf surged forward, protective, possessive. These were his children, his blood, growing strong inside the woman who'd been made for him. Talk to them, Selene said. What? They respond to your voice. I've noticed it before. When I hear you speak, they settle. How would you hear me speak? You've been gone for 6 months. The bond. Even when it was broken, I could still feel echoes sometimes. Your voice, your emotions. It was like hearing someone shout from the other side of a wall. Kaelthorn's throat tightened. He leaned closer and spoke directly to her belly. Easy now. Your mother needs rest. You can kick all you want after you're born, but right now you let her sleep. The movement slowed, then stopped. Selene exhaled. How did you do that? They know their father. Apparently, she leaned back against the tent support. Exhaustion was carved into every line of her face. Kaelthorn wanted to gather her up and carry her somewhere safe where she could rest for a week straight. Instead, he just sat beside her and let his presence stabilize the bond. After a while, she spoke. What happens when we get to Velmora? We deal with Morel. How? Publicly, decisively. You can't just execute her. She's the anointed queen. I can do whatever I want. I'm the king. That's not how kingdoms work. It is when the king has had enough of playing by rules that were designed to control him. Selene looked at him sideways. You've changed. So have you. Fair. They sat in silence. Outside the tent, guards moved through the camp. Horses shifted and stamped. The world kept turning. Inside, 2 people who'd been torn apart were slowly learning how to exist in the same space again. Selene's head dropped onto his shoulder. Kaelthorn went perfectly still. I'm still angry at you, she mumbled. I know. And I don't forgive you yet. I don't expect you to. But I'm glad you came. Me too. Her breathing evened out. Sleep took her quickly. Kaelthorn sat there holding his pregnant mate while dawn approached and a war waited on the other side of the horizon. He'd found her. Now he had to keep her. And anyone who tried to take her away was going to learn exactly how far an Alpha King would go to protect what belonged to him. They reached the capital walls at sunset 7 days later. Velmora rose against the dying light like a corpse dressed in gold. The towers still stood tall, but the banners hung limp. No crowds gathered at the gates. No merchants hawked their wares in the outer market. The city that had once been the jewel of the northern territories looked hollow. Kaelthorn felt it the moment they crossed the threshold. Wrong. Everything was wrong. The bond with the land had been damaged for months, but now it felt actively poisoned, like something rotten had sunk roots deep into the foundations and was spreading. Selene shifted in her saddle beside him. She felt it too. Her hand went to her belly where the twins had been restless all day. The golden marks on her skin pulsed faint light even through her travel cloak. Gareth rode up on Kaelthorn's left. The gates are open, but there's no guard. Where are they? Gone? Or dead? Hard to tell. Kaelthorn scanned the empty courtyard beyond the walls. This should have been the busiest part of the city. Instead, it looked abandoned. Windows shuttered, doors barred. Not a soul in sight. It's a trap, Selene said quietly. Probably. And we're riding straight into it. You have a better idea? She looked at him. Her gray eyes were hard. We could burn it all down and start over. Tempting. I'm not joking. Neither am I. They rode through the gates. The sound of hoofbeats echoed off empty stone. 50 soldiers fanned out in formation around them, weapons drawn, eyes sharp. Every man among them could feel the wrongness settling over the city like fog. Kaelthorn led them toward the palace. The streets got narrower as they climbed. Houses pressed close on either side. He caught movement behind shuttered windows, eyes watching. Whispers he couldn't quite hear. The people were still here. They were just hiding. From what? He didn't know yet. But he was about to find out. The palace gates stood open too. That was the first real sign of how bad things had gotten. Those gates were never left unguarded, never left open after dark. Someone had either abandoned their post or been removed from it. Kaelthorn dismounted and helped Selene down from her horse. She'd been riding for 7 days while 6 months pregnant, and she had to be exhausted, but she didn't show it. Just straightened her cloak and lifted her chin like she was walking into a negotiation instead of potential slaughter. His wolf surged with pride. Stay close, he told her. I'm not planning to wander off. If anything happens, I know. Selene's hand went to the blade tucked into her belt. Small, but sharp. She'd insisted on carrying a weapon ever since they left Thornwick. Kaelthorn had given her one of his own knives. The balance was wrong for her, but she'd practiced with it every night. Now she looked like she was ready to use it. They walked through the courtyard. The palace doors were closed, but not locked. Kaelthorn pushed them open and stepped into darkness. Torches should have been burning in the entrance hall. Servants should have been rushing to greet the returning king. Instead, there was silence. And then a voice cut through the dark. Welcome home, Your Majesty. Lights flared. Torches ignited along the walls all at once. The sudden brightness blinded Kaelthorn for a crucial second. By the time his vision adjusted, he saw what was waiting for them. The entrance hall was full of armed men. At least 200 soldiers in formation blocking the path to the throne room, all of them wearing the colors of House Ashvorn. All of them with weapons drawn and pointed at Kaelthorn's small company. And standing at the front with a smile that could cut glass was Lady Morell Ashvorn. She wore the crown. His crown. The one he'd been forced to place on her head 6 months ago. Morell spread her arms in mock welcome. You've been gone so long. We were starting to worry. Kaelthorn's hand went to his sword. His soldiers moved into defensive positions around him and Selene. The odds were not good. 4-1 at minimum. In close quarters. Against men who'd had time to prepare. He scanned the room looking for options. There weren't many. Morell's gaze slid past him to Selene. And you brought a pet. How charming. Selene didn't flinch, didn't look away, just stared back with the kind of cold fury that came from 6 months of surviving on her own. Kaelthorn felt the bond tighten between them, felt the bonfire start to wake beneath Selene's skin. Golden light began to seep through her cloak. Morell noticed. Her smile widened. Oh, good. The rumors are true. Ancient magic. How delightful. Release the throne, Kaelthorn said. His voice came out flat and dangerous. This ends now. Does it? You were never the rightful queen. You know that. I know I'm the one wearing the crown. That seems fairly definitive. Not for long. Morell laughed. It echoed wrong in the vast space. You still don't understand, do you? You still think this was about love or bonds or some romantic notion of destiny. Then what was it about? Power. What else is there? She gestured and more soldiers emerged from the side corridors. They kept coming until the hall was packed wall to wall with armed men. Hundreds of them. Maybe close to 1,000. Kaelthorn's soldiers tightened their formation. They were good. The best he had. But they were outnumbered 20-1 now. This wasn't a fight they could win. Selene's hand found his. Her fingers were cold, the bond pulsed between them carrying a message without words. Trust me. Kaelthorn didn't have much choice. Morel descended the steps toward them. Her guards parted to let her through. She stopped just out of sword range and tilted her head. Here's what's going to happen, she said pleasantly. You're going to surrender. Your men are going to lay down their weapons, and your pregnant whore is going to disappear into the dungeons where she belongs. Kaelthorn's vision went red. His wolf exploded forward. The shift tried to take him right there in the entrance hall. He fought it back through sheer force of will, but his canines had already elongated. His eyes burned gold. Touch her and I'll kill you, he snarled. With what army? You brought 50 men. I have 1,000. The math isn't complicated. I don't need an army. No? I just need you close enough to rip your throat out. Morel's smile never wavered. That's why you're going to surrender. Because if you shift here, if you start a fight in this enclosed space, your precious mate and those royal bastards she's carrying will be the first casualties. She was right. Kaelthorn hated that she was right. If he shifted now, he'd lose control. His wolf was barely contained as it was. One wrong move and he'd tear through friend and foe alike until someone put him down. And Selene was standing right behind him. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to find some angle that didn't end with everyone he cared about dead on the palace floor. There wasn't one. Morel saw the moment he realized it. Her expression shifted to something almost like pity. You should have stayed hidden, Kaelthorn. You should have let the kingdom die quietly. Instead, you dragged her back here, and now you're both going to pay for it. Who's controlling you? What? Someone used blood magic to force me to crown you. Someone powerful enough to trap an alpha king. Who was it? Morel's laugh was genuine this time. You think I'm being controlled? How sweet. Then you did this on your own. Not alone, but certainly by choice. Why? Because I could. Because noble-born women don't get to be queens on our own merit. We have to marry the right man and hope he doesn't discard us for someone prettier. I decided to skip the hoping part. So you used blood magic. I used resources. What resources? The old bloodlines, the forgotten houses, all those noble families who've been pushed to the edges while upstarts and commoners climbed over them. She gestured around the hall. We've been planning this for years, she continued, gathering power, learning the ancient magics, waiting for the right moment to take what should have been ours from the beginning. Kaelthorn's mind raced. If Morel was telling the truth, then this wasn't just about one ambitious woman. This was a coordinated attack by multiple houses, a conspiracy that had been building in the shadows while he'd been focused on ruling. He'd missed it. He'd been so convinced of his own power that he'd stopped watching for knives in the dark. And now those knives were at his throat. Where's my council? He demanded. Dead or imprisoned? Take your pick. The nobles who supported me? Either joined us or learned what happens to those who don't. How many houses? Enough. Give me a number. 7, maybe 8 by now. Kaelthorn felt the foundation crack beneath him. 7 houses meant thousands of soldiers. Tens of thousands if they'd been mobilizing for months. His own forces were scattered across the kingdom trying to maintain order. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, checkmated. Morel watched him process it. You're wondering if you can salvage this. If there's some move you haven't seen yet. There isn't. You lost the moment you rode through those gates. Then why are we still talking? Because I'm not a monster. I'm offering you a choice. What choice? Abdicate. Publicly renounce your claim, accept me as the rightful queen, and your mate as a prisoner of state. Do that, and I'll let you live. Live as what? A broken king, stripped of power, locked away where you can't cause trouble. It's better than death. And Selene? She stays in the dungeons until those twins are born. After that, we'll see how useful they are. The bond between them flared so hot it nearly burned. Kaelthorn felt Selene's rage bleeding through the connection. Felt her preparing to fight even though the odds were suicide. He put his hand on her arm. A warning. A plea. Wait. Selene looked at him, and he saw murder in her eyes. Morel smiled. Smart girl. She knows when she's beaten. Kaelthorn turned back to the false queen. His mind was working furiously, calculating, looking for the single thread he could pull that would unravel everything. And then he found it. "You made a mistake," he said quietly. "Did I?" "You brought me inside, close to the throne, close to the source of your power." Morel's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "The blood magic you used. It's tied to the throne room. That's where you performed the ritual 6 months ago. That's where the anchor is." Her face went pale. Kaelthorn pressed forward. "If I destroy the anchor, the spell breaks. All of it. Every piece of magic holding this conspiracy together. You can't reach the throne room. My men will cut you down before you take 10 steps. Probably. Then what's the point?" He looked at Selene. The golden marks were blazing now, visible even through her cloak. The bonfire was responding to his proximity, to the threat, to the raw need to protect what was theirs. "The point," Kaelthorn said, "is that I'm not the only one who can destroy your anchor." Understanding crashed across Morel's face. She lunged forward. "Kill the girl, now!" But it was too late. Selene's eyes had gone pure gold. The bonfire erupted. Golden light exploded outward from her body like the sun breaking open. It hit Morel's soldiers and sent them flying. Screams filled the hall. Men tried to raise weapons, but the ancient magic was faster, hotter, older than any power they'd prepared for. Kaelthorn shifted. The wolf took him in a rush of fur and rage. He hit the ground running, tore through the first rank of soldiers before they could react. Blood sprayed, bones crunched. His jaws found throats and ripped. Behind him, Selene stood in the center of a golden inferno. The bonfire had fully awakened, and it was burning everything in reach. Soldiers caught fire. Weapons melted. The very stones of the palace began to crack under the pressure of magic that hadn't walked the earth in centuries. Kaelthorn fought his way toward the throne room. Guards tried to stop him. He killed them without slowing. His wolf was fully in control now. Nothing existed except the path forward and the need to reach the anchor. He burst through the throne room doors. The chamber was exactly as he remembered: high ceilings, stained glass windows, and in the center, the throne itself. Except now there were symbols carved into the floor around it. Blood magic. The anchor Morel had used to control him 6 months ago. Kaelthorn shifted back to human form. Naked and covered in blood, he walked toward the throne. Each step felt like moving through quicksand. The magic resisted, tried to push him back. He kept going. Behind him, the sounds of battle raged. Selene's bonfire was still burning. He could feel it through the bond, feel her pouring every ounce of power into holding back an army. She was buying him time. He couldn't waste it. Kaelthorn reached the throne and placed both hands on the armrests. The symbols on the floor began to glow. Red light pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The magic tried to trap him again, tried to lock him inside his own mind. But he'd been trapped before. He knew what it felt like. And this time, he was ready. Kaelthorn called his wolf forward. Let the shift take him halfway. Claws extended. Canines dropped. Power flooded his system. He was neither man nor beast, but something caught between. And in that space he had leverage. He drove his claws into the throne. The wood splintered. Ancient magic screamed. The symbols on the floor cracked and began to bleed actual blood. Kaelthorn ripped the throne apart piece by piece. The anchor shattered. A shockwave rolled through the palace. Every spell Morel's conspirators had woven collapsed at once. Soldiers who'd been under compulsion suddenly came back to themselves. Others simply dropped dead as the magic sustaining them failed. Kaelthorn shifted back to human and staggered. He'd done it. The anchor was destroyed. But when he turned around, he saw the cost. Morel stood in the doorway with a blade pressed to Selene's throat. The bonfire had gone dark. Selene's eyes were her own again, but she was pale, shaking, clearly exhausted from channeling that much power. And Morel had her. "Drop the knife," Kaelthorn said. Morel's hand was steady. She'd lost the crown somewhere in the fighting. Her dress was torn and blood-stained, but her expression was calm. "You broke my anchor," she said. "Clever. Let her go." "Why would I do that? She's the only leverage I have left." "You've already lost." "Have I?" Morel's smile was broken glass. Your mate just burned through half my forces with ancient magic. She's valuable. Maybe more valuable than a crown. What are you saying? I'm saying there are people who would pay a fortune for a woman who can channel Bondfire. People who collect rare bloodlines the way others collect art. Kaelthorn's blood ran cold. Human traffickers, slavers, the kind of monsters who operated in the spaces between kingdoms where laws didn't reach. Morel saw his understanding. That's right. If I can't have the throne, I'll settle for the profit. Your precious mate and those royal twins will fetch enough gold to fund an army. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. She pressed the blade harder. A thin line of blood appeared on Selene's throat. Kaelthorn's wolf howled. The Bond screamed. Every instinct demanded he attack. Tear Morel apart, save his mate. But if he moved, Selene would die before he covered half the distance. So he stood there, helpless. Watching the woman he'd torn a kingdom apart to find held at knife point by someone he should have killed months ago. This was what happened when kings thought they were untouchable. When they stopped watching the shadows because they believed their power made them safe. He'd been arrogant, and Selene was paying the price. Morel started backing toward a side door, taking Selene with her. Your Majesty has a choice to make. Follow me, and she dies. Let me leave, and maybe I'll sell her to someone kind. There was no good option. Kaelthorn couldn't let her take Selene, but he couldn't save her by force. He needed something else. Something Morel wouldn't expect. Selene's eyes met his across the room, and in that look he saw everything. The anger, the fear, the absolute refusal to go down without a fight. She mouthed 2 words, "Trust me." Then she drove her elbow back into Morel's ribs. The false queen gasped and the blade wavered. Selene twisted, grabbed Morel's wrist, and the golden marks on her skin flared to life one more time. Not the full bonfire, just enough, just targeted. The heat hit Morel's hand and she shrieked. The knife clattered to the floor. Selene shoved her away and dove toward Kaelthorn. He caught her. Morel scrambled for the side door. She was fast, desperate. She nearly made it, but Gareth stepped into the doorway with his sword drawn. The blade went through Morel's chest before she could scream. She looked down at the steel protruding from her body, looked up at Kaelthorn with something like disbelief. Then she crumpled. Silence fell over the throne room. Kaelthorn held Selene against his chest and felt her heartbeat, felt the twins moving, felt the bond settle into something that almost resembled peace. They'd survived, barely. Gareth pulled his sword free and wiped it clean. The conspiracy? Kaelthorn looked at the blood spreading across the floor, at the shattered throne, at the woman who'd nearly destroyed everything. Find them all, he said. Every noble who supported her, every house that raised arms. I want names. And then? Then we show them what happens when you try to trap a king and steal his mate. His voice was empty of everything except cold purpose, the kind of purpose that came from realizing you'd been seconds away from losing everything that mattered, the kind that burned away mercy and left only survival. Selene pulled back enough to look at him. Her hand went to his face. We need to be smart about this. I'm done being smart. I'm going to burn them all. If you do that, you'll start a real war, the kind that destroys kingdoms. Let it burn. Kaelthorn. He looked at her. She was right, and he knew it. If he retaliated with the full weight of his rage, he'd create a blood feud that would last generations. Noble houses would rally, commoners would suffer, the kingdom would tear itself apart. But the alternative was showing weakness, and weakness invited more attacks. He was trapped between 2 impossible choices. Destroy his enemies and lose the kingdom, or show mercy and invite betrayal. There was no third option. Selene's eyes held his. Her voice was quiet but steady. There's always another way. We just have to be willing to change everything we thought we knew about power. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe the problem isn't the nobles. Maybe it's the system that gives them enough power to challenge you in the first place. You want me to dismantle the nobility? I want you to rebuild from the ground up. Strip the old houses of their inherited power. Give it to people who earn it. Create something new. That would take years. We have time. Kaelthorn stared at her. At this woman who'd survived 6 months alone while pregnant, who just channeled ancient magic to hold back an army, who was standing in a room full of corpses suggesting political revolution like it was the most natural thing in the world. His wolf recognized her as his equal. maybe his better. Fine, he said. We do it your way. But Morel's co-conspirators still answer for what they did. Agreed. But we do it through law, through trial, through proof that the crown is stronger than any house. You're asking me to be the thing I hate. What's that? Patient. Selene smiled. It was tired and blood-stained, but real. I'm asking you to be a king instead of a wolf. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. A wolf destroys threats. A king builds something worth protecting. The words hit harder than any blade. Kaelthorn looked around the throne room, at the shattered seat of power, at his second-in-command waiting for orders, at the woman in his arms who just redefined what strength meant. And he made the hardest choice of his life. He chose to build instead of burn, even though every instinct screamed for blood, even though the wolf inside him wanted to hunt down every conspirator and paint the palace walls with their remains. He chose the path that made him more than what his nature demanded. Gareth, he said, secure the palace. Find the remaining conspirators. Bring them to trial. Not execution? Not yet. We do this by law. Gareth looked skeptical but nodded. As you command. He left to carry out the orders. Selene sagged against Kaelthorn. Now that the immediate threat was over, her exhaustion was catching up. The twins were probably draining her. The bonfire had definitely drained her. She needed rest, safety, time to recover. He lifted her into his arms. She didn't protest. I can walk, she murmured. I know. Let me carry you anyway. Why? Because I need to feel you breathing. I need to know you're real. She pressed her face against his shoulder. I'm here. We're both here. For now. Forever if I have anything to say about it. Kaelthorn carried her out of the throne room and through the palace corridors. Soldiers were cleaning up the aftermath of the battle. Bodies, weapons, blood. It would take days to set everything right, but at least they were alive to do it. He took Selene to his private chambers. The room had been untouched during the fighting, still exactly as he'd left it 6 months ago when he'd gone to the choosing ceremony, expecting to crown the woman he loved, and instead been trapped inside his own body. He laid her on the bed. She didn't let go of him. Stay. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. He stretched out beside her, fully clothed and still covered in blood from the battle. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except that she was safe and the bond was whole, and the twins were still moving inside her. Selene's hand found his. What happens now? Now we survive. We rebuild. We make sure this never happens again. And the conspirators? We make an example without creating martyrs. How? I don't know yet. But we'll figure it out. Together? Together. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so soft he almost missed it. I think I'm starting to forgive you. Kaelthorn's chest tightened. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. Life's too short to carry that much anger, even after everything, especially after everything. He pulled her closer, careful of her belly, mindful of how fragile this moment was. They'd survived an assassination, a coup, a battle in the heart of his own palace. But the real fight was just beginning, because now they had to transform a kingdom built on old power into something new. And that kind of change always came with a price. 3 weeks after Morel's death, the noble houses made their move. They came not with armies, but with law. Kaelthorn stood in the council chamber staring at documents that technically gave him no choice. 7 noble houses had filed formal grievances with the High Court. They demanded his abdication on grounds of mental instability, unlawful execution of a crowned queen, and failure to produce a legitimate heir. The last part was particularly clever. His marriage to Morel had never been consummated. She'd died before bearing children, which meant technically the throne had no direct succession, and Selene's twins didn't count because she wasn't his legal wife. Gareth stood beside him reading through the accusations. This is coordinated. They're using the law as a weapon, because I can't burn them for filing paperwork. Exactly. Kaelthorn's hands clenched on the table. He'd been trying to do this the right way. Trials, due process, rebuilding instead of destroying. But the noble houses had adapted faster than he'd expected. They'd learned that challenging him with swords ended badly, so they'd switched to something harder to fight. Bureaucracy. What happens if I ignore this? He asked. The High Court can declare you in contempt, strip your legitimacy, give the noble houses legal grounds to install someone else. Who? Whoever they choose. Probably someone with enough bloodline to claim distant relation to the throne, but weak enough to control. A puppet. Yes. Kaelthorn looked out the window at the city below. Velmora was slowly recovering. Markets were open again. People moved through the streets without fear. The land itself felt healthier now that the blood magic anchor was destroyed. But it was fragile. One wrong move and everything would collapse again. The door opened and Selene walked in. She was 7 months pregnant now and moved with the careful balance of someone carrying significant weight. The twins had grown fast. Too fast, according to the healers. They suspected the Bondfire was feeding them power even in the womb. Selene's hand went to her belly in the unconscious gesture she'd developed. The golden marks on her skin were visible today. She'd stopped hiding them after the battle. Let people see what she was. Let them fear it. "What's wrong?" she asked. Kaelthorn handed her the documents. She read through them quickly. Her expression darkened with each page. When she finished, she set the papers down with deliberate calm. "They're trying to legislate you out of power." "Yes." "Can they do that?" "If I let them." "Don't. I'm trying not to. But there are rules even kings have to follow, or the whole system falls apart." "Then change the system." Selene said it like it was simple, like rewriting centuries of law was something you could accomplish over breakfast. Kaelthorn almost smiled. "You make revolution sound easy. It is when you stop caring about what's supposed to be impossible." She moved to the window and looked out at the same view he'd been studying. The afternoon light caught the gold in her marks and made them shine. "They're scared of us," she said, "of what we represent. Which is power they can't control. A bond they can't break. Magic they thought was extinct. We're everything they spent generations trying to eliminate. So what do? We remind them why extinction didn't work the first time." Kaelthorn studied her profile. She'd changed in the weeks since the battle. Become harder, more focused. The woman who'd hidden in a border village was gone. In her place was someone who looked like she could burn kingdoms and sleep soundly afterward. His wolf recognized her as a true alpha. Not born to it, but forged by necessity. "The High Court convenes in 4 days, Gareth said. "You need to respond before then, or they'll rule in absentia." "Then we respond," Selene said, "publicly, in a way they can't ignore." Both men looked at her. She turned from the window. Her gray eyes were cold as winter. "You want to change the system? Start by taking away their leverage. The only reason they can challenge your legitimacy is because I'm not your legal wife and the twins aren't recognized heirs. We can't marry while I'm still legally bound to Morel's memory." "Why not? The law is written by people. It can be rewritten, not in 4 days." Selene smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. "Watch me." 2 days later, she stood before the High Court uninvited. The chamber was ancient. Stone walls that had witnessed 1,000 judgments. Seats arranged in a semicircle where judges in formal robes looked down at whoever stood in the center, designed to intimidate, to remind people that law was bigger than any individual. Selene walked into the center alone, 7 months pregnant, marked with golden script that no one in the room could pretend not to recognize, wearing a dress that covered nothing because hiding was for people who felt shame. She felt none. The Chief Justice was a man named Aldrich Thorn. Old bloodline, older loyalties. He'd probably signed off on half the grievances filed against Kaelthorn. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Lady Rivarin, this is a closed session. Not anymore. You have no standing to address this court. I have the standing of someone carrying the future of this kingdom in her womb. That seems relevant." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Other nobles had packed the viewing sections, all of them waiting to watch Kaelthorn's legitimacy get dismantled piece by piece. None of them had expected her to show up. Aldrich's face flushed. "The matters before this court are based on the premise that King Kaelthorn has no legitimate heir. I'm here to correct that misconception. You're not his legal wife, not yet. The marriage laws are clear. A king cannot wed while bound to a previous union. Then it's fortunate that previous union was obtained through blood magic and therefore invalid." The chamber exploded. Nobles shouted. Judges called for order. Aldrich slammed his gavel hard enough to crack the wood. Silence fell. "Those are serious accusations," the Chief Justice said. "They're documented facts. King Kaelthorn was controlled during the choosing ceremony, forced to crown a woman he'd never chosen. The marriage was sealed while he was imprisoned inside his own body. That makes it void." "Do you have proof?" Selene reached into the satchel she'd brought. She pulled out a sealed document and walked forward to hand it to the nearest court official. Testimony from 3 independent mages who examined the throne room after the battle. They all confirmed the presence of blood magic anchors designed specifically to control an Alpha King. They all signed affidavits stating the magic was active during the choosing ceremony. She'd spent 2 weeks tracking down mages willing to testify. It hadn't been easy. Most of them were terrified of contradicting the noble houses. But Selene had learned that fear was negotiable when you had enough leverage. The official passed the document to Aldrich. He read it in silence. His expression didn't change, but his hands tightened on the pages. "Even if this is accurate," he said slowly, "it doesn't change the legal standing. The marriage was conducted according to all proper rituals. Rituals performed under magical compulsion. That's a technicality. That's the law. A contract signed under duress is invalid. A marriage forced through magical control is the definition of duress." She was twisting the argument, using their own legal framework against them. Kaelthorn had taught her that during the long nights when they'd planned this strategy, the nobles couldn't challenge her logic without admitting that forced marriage was acceptable, and if they admitted that, every house with daughters would turn against them. Aldrich saw the trap. His jaw worked. "You're asking this court to retroactively annul a royal marriage based on magical interference that cannot be definitively proven to have affected the king's judgment during the ceremony itself. I'm asking this court to acknowledge reality. King Kaelthorn was controlled. Lady Morell was part of a conspiracy to seize the throne through illegal means. The marriage was a tool of that conspiracy. It has no legal weight." One of the other judges leaned forward. A woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. "Even if we accept your argument, it doesn't grant you legal standing. You're still not married to the king." Selene turned to face her. "Not yet. But I am his fated mate, his true bond, the mother of his children and the bearer of Bondfire that hasn't been seen in this kingdom for 3 centuries. She let the golden marks flare. Light filled the chamber. Ancient script blazed across her skin. The air itself seemed to vibrate with power that made every wolf in the room feel their own bond to the land strengthen. "This is what legitimacy looks like," Selene said. "Not crowns placed by conspirators, not marriages forced through blood magic. This, a bond so strong it woke magic your ancestors thought was lost forever." The judges stared. In the gallery, nobles shifted uncomfortably. They'd come expecting legal maneuvering, technical arguments about succession law. Instead, they were watching a woman claim power on grounds that predated their legal system entirely. Aldrich found his voice. "The Bondfire is not recognized as a legal basis for..." "Then recognize it." The chamber went silent. Selene met the Chief Justice's eyes. "You have a choice. Acknowledge what I am and what that means for this kingdom's future. Or try to legislate around power that doesn't care about your paperwork. Either way, these twins will be born in 8 weeks. And when they are, they'll carry royal blood and Bondfire both. You can make them legitimate heirs now through law, or you can wait for them to claim legitimacy through force when they're old enough to understand what you tried to take from them." It wasn't a threat. It was a timeline. And everyone in the room knew the difference. Aldrich looked at the other judges. Selene couldn't hear their whispered conference, but she could read the tension in their body language. They were scared. Good. Fear was honest. Fear meant they understood what was at stake. After what felt like an eternity, Aldrich turned back to her. "This court will take your testimony under advisement. We'll reconvene in 2 days with a ruling on the annulment petition." "Not good enough." "Excuse me?" Selene stepped closer to the bench. "I need an answer today. Because tomorrow King Kaelthorn and I are getting married whether you annul his previous union or not. You can legitimize it now and save face. Or you can rule against us and explain to the kingdom why you opposed a true mate bond backed by ancient magic. You can't marry without the court's approval. Watch me. Lady Raverin, I'm done playing by rules written to keep people like me powerless. Either change with us or get buried by what comes next. She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, chaos erupted. Selene kept walking. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. The twins were kicking so hard it hurt. But she'd done it. She'd challenged the entire legal system to its face and walked away alive. Kaelthorn was waiting in the corridor outside. He searched her face. How bad? Either they annul your marriage to Morel by tomorrow, or we get married anyway and deal with the consequences. That's treason. Only if we lose. His expression shifted. You really want to do this? Selene took his hand, pressed it to her belly where the twins were fighting each other for space. Feel that? That's our future. I'm not letting a room full of scared old men decide whether they deserve to exist. Kaelthorn's eyes went gold. Neither am I. Then we do this together. Together. They sealed it with a kiss that tasted like rebellion and smoke. The next morning, the High Court delivered their ruling. They annulled Kaelthorn's marriage to Morel Ashvorn on grounds of magical compulsion. It was a footnote at the bottom of a 20-page document full of legal justifications and precedents, but it was official. Kaelthorn read it twice to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Gareth leaned over his shoulder. They caved. They saw the alternative. Selene must have terrified them. She terrifies everyone. That's why she's perfect. The ceremony was scheduled for sunset, not in the throne room. That place still carried the stench of Morel's conspiracy. Instead, they chose the cliffs overlooking the northern forest. Open sky, clean air, the kind of space where ancient magic felt at home. Selene wore white silk that draped over her pregnant belly without hiding it. Gold thread traced the bonfire marks on her exposed skin. Her hair hung loose past her shoulders. She looked like something out of legend. Kaelthorn wore the formal armor of his bloodline, black steel etched with symbols older than the kingdom itself. The crown sat on his head, but it felt different now. Less like a burden and more like a tool. Hundreds of wolves gathered on the cliffs to witness. Not just nobility, common folk too. Soldiers, merchants, healers, anyone who'd survived the conspiracy and wanted to see what came next. The ceremony was conducted by an elder from one of the old packs, a woman who remembered when bonds like this were celebrated instead of legislated. She spoke the ancient words, called on the land to recognize what was being sealed here. Kaelthorn took Selene's hands. The bond between them flared bright enough that everyone watching could feel it, a connection that went deeper than vows or crowns or any law written by mortal hands. When he kissed her, the bonfire erupted. Golden light washed across the cliffs. Every wolf present felt their own bond to the land strengthen, felt the kingdom itself stabilize under the weight of a true mate pairing. This was what power looked like when it wasn't stolen or forced, when it was earned through survival and choice and the refusal to break. The crowd roared approval. Kaelthorn and Selene turned to face them as husband and wife, as king and queen, as the mated pair who'd torn through conspiracy and law and tradition to claim what belonged to them. For one perfect moment, everything felt possible. Then the messenger arrived. He was bloody, half dead. His horse had collapsed at the base of the cliff, and he'd climbed the rest of the way on foot. He fell to his knees in front of Kaelthorn. Your Majesty. The northern houses have raised their banners. 40,000 soldiers marching on the capital. They'll be here in 3 days. The celebration died. Kaelthorn looked at Gareth. How many men do we have? 10,000 in the capital. Maybe another 5,000 scattered across the kingdom if we can call them in. Not enough. No. Selene's hand found his. Her voice was quiet. They're not coming to negotiate. No. They're coming to end this. Because we didn't give them a choice. We forced the court's hand, and now the houses who refuse to bend are bringing war. Kaelthorn looked out at the gathered crowd, at the wolves who'd come to celebrate and were now learning they'd be fighting for survival, at his pregnant wife who should have been safe and protected instead of standing on a cliff facing the prospect of battle. This was the cost of revolution. The nobles who'd filed legal challenges had been the moderate faction, the ones willing to work within the system. The ones marching on the capital now were the extremists, the houses who believed in the old ways so completely they'd burn the kingdom down rather than accept change, and they were bringing enough soldiers to do it. 3 days, Kaelthorn said. Gareth nodded. 3 days to prepare. Can we hold? The cliffs give us defensive advantage. The walls are strong, but against 40,000? We'll be slaughtered. Unless we meet them in the field. That's suicide. Maybe. Kaelthorn's mind raced. Every tactical option ended in disaster. They were outnumbered 4-1, undersupplied, unprepared for a siege of this scale. The smart move was surrender. Give the noble houses what they wanted. Step down. Let them install a puppet king. Save as many lives as possible. But surrender meant Selene and the twins became bargaining chips. And that was never going to happen. Selene stepped forward. She addressed the crowd in a voice that carried across the cliffs. You all came here tonight expecting a celebration. Instead, you're getting a war. I won't lie to you. The odds are terrible. The enemy is larger, better prepared. And they're coming to wipe us out because we dared to believe the old ways could change. She paused. The bonfire marks on her skin began to glow. But here's the truth they don't understand. Power isn't about numbers. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to protect what matters. They're marching here to preserve a system that treats people like pieces on a board. We're fighting for the right to choose our own future. The crowd was silent, listening. So here's what I'm offering. Stand with us and we'll give you a kingdom worth dying for. Or leave now and I'll make sure you're protected when this is over. No shame, no judgment, just a choice. She let the words hang. No one moved. Then a soldier stepped forward, a common wolf who'd fought in the battle against Morel's forces. I'm staying. Another joined him, and another. Within minutes, the entire crowd had closed ranks. They were staying, all of them. Kaelthorn felt something crack open in his chest. He'd spent 30 years ruling through authority and fear and political maneuvering. Selene had just earned loyalty in under 5 minutes by offering people the thing they wanted most. Respect. He pulled her close, careful of her belly. You're going to make one hell of a queen. I already am one. Fair. Gareth cleared his throat. Your Majesties, we still have the problem of being outnumbered 4-1. Kaelthorn looked at his second. Then we even the odds. How? By doing the one thing they won't expect. We don't wait for them to reach the capital. We march out and meet them halfway. That's insane. Probably. But it gives us terrain advantage if we choose the battlefield. And it shows we're not afraid. We should be afraid. 40,000 soldiers aren't expecting us to attack. They're planning a siege. If we hit them on the march while they're spread out, we might break their formation before they can organize. It's still suicide. Selene's voice cut in. Not if we use the bonfire. Both men looked at her. She met Kaelthorn's eyes. I can channel it. Turn it into a weapon. We proved that in the palace. You nearly burned yourself out doing it for 10 minutes. This would be ours. Then it's a good thing I've spent 3 weeks learning to control it. Selene, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you this is the only option that gives us a chance. You fight on the ground. I burn everything that gets too close. You're 7 months pregnant, which means I have 8 weeks to make sure my children are born into a kingdom that's still standing. Kaelthorn wanted to argue, wanted to lock her somewhere safe and handle this himself. But she was right. The bonfire was the only advantage they had against an army that size, and Selene was the only one who could wield it. He looked at Gareth. How fast can we mobilize? If we strip the city garrison? 12 hours. Do it. We march at dawn. The second saluted and ran. Kaelthorn turned back to Selene. If this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, then we go down fighting, together, the way it should be. She kissed him hard enough to bruise. When she pulled back, her eyes were blazing gold. The bonfire was already waking, ready for war. And in that moment, Kaelthorn understood something fundamental about the woman he'd married. She wasn't just his mate. She was the weapon that would decide whether their kingdom survived or burned. Either way, the noble houses were about to learn what happened when you backed an alpha queen into a corner and threatened her children. They marched at dawn, 10,000 soldiers moving fast and light toward the northern pass where the enemy would have to funnel through. Kaelthorn rode at the front, Selene beside him despite every instinct screaming to make her stay behind. She'd refused, said if she wasn't on the battlefield, the bonfire wouldn't be either. So he'd given her the fastest horse and surrounded her with his best guards and tried not to think about all the ways this could end in disaster. They reached the pass by midday. It was perfect defensive terrain, narrow canyon with high walls on both sides. Any army trying to push through would be compressed into a killing field. Gareth positioned archers on the ridges, infantry at the choke points, cavalry ready to flank if the enemy broke through. It was the best they could do with what they had. Now they waited. The enemy arrived 3 hours later. 40,000 soldiers in formation, banners from 7 noble houses flying above them. They moved with the confidence of an overwhelming force that knew it couldn't lose. Their commander rode forward under a white flag. Kaelthorn met him in the center of the pass. The commander was young, probably early 30s, noble-born from his bearing. He looked at Kaelthorn with the kind of contempt reserved for people who'd already decided you were beneath them. King Kaelthorn. You have one chance to avoid bloodshed. Surrender the throne and the woman. Will allow you exile. Kaelthorn's wolf snarled beneath his skin. And if I refuse, then we bury you here and install a king who understands proper order. Define proper order. Rule by bloodline, by tradition, by the houses who've held power since this kingdom was founded. You mean rule by people too scared of change to admit the world moved on without them? The commander's jaw tightened. You mock us while outnumbered 4-1. Numbers aren't everything. They are when your wife is pregnant and standing behind you like a liability. Kaelthorn's vision went red. His shift tried to take him right there. He forced it back through sheer will, but his eyes had already gone gold. His voice dropped to something barely human. Call her a liability again. I dare you. The commander smirked. What will you do? You can't win this. You know it. We know it. Surrender now and save your people the slaughter. Kaelthorn leaned closer. You want to know what's about to happen? I'm going to ride back to my line. You're going to order your men to attack. And then my wife is going to show you exactly what 3 centuries of lost magic can do to an army that thought it was unstoppable. You're bluffing. Try me. Kaelthorn turned his horse and rode back. Behind him, the commander called out, This is your last chance! Kaelthorn didn't answer. He took position beside Selene. She looked at him. Ready? No, but we're doing this anyway. She smiled. That's the spirit. The bonfire marks on her skin were already glowing, bright enough to be visible even in daylight. Power radiated off her in waves that made the air shimmer. Across the pass, the enemy army began to advance, 40,000 soldiers moving as one. The ground trembled under their feet. War drums pounded a rhythm that echoed off the canyon walls. Kaelthorn raised his hand, his own forces tensed, waiting. The enemy got within 200 yards. Selene closed her eyes. The bonfire exploded. Golden light erupted from her body like the sun breaking open. It rolled across the battlefield in a wave of ancient power that hit the front ranks of the enemy army and set them ablaze. Men screamed. Horses bolted. The entire front line collapsed into chaos. But there were 40,000 of them. They kept coming. Selene poured more power into the flames. The bonfire spread, climbed higher, burned hotter. Kaelthorn felt the bond strain. She was channeling too much, faster than she could sustain. The twins inside her were feeding on the magic and amplifying it, but they were also draining her. He grabbed her hand. Selene, you have to pace yourself. Her eyes snapped open. They were pure gold. No pupils. Just burning light. When she spoke, her voice echoed with something older than kingdoms. They wanted ancient magic. Let them drown in it. The bonfire surged, and the pass turned into hell. The bonfire didn't discriminate. It consumed everything in its path with the kind of ancient hunger that had been sleeping for centuries, waiting for someone strong enough to wake it. Enemy soldiers burned where they stood. War horses screamed and collapsed into ash. Weapons melted. Armor ran like water. Kaelthorn watched 40,000 men realize they'd marched into something beyond mortal combat, but the cost was visible. Selene's hands trembled, blood ran from her nose. The twins inside her were thrashing so violently he could see the movement through her clothes. The bonfire was feeding on her life force faster than she could replenish it, and she was still pouring more power into the flames because stopping now meant death for everyone behind her. He grabbed her shoulders. Selene, you have to pull back. Her voice came out strained. Not yet. You're killing yourself. Better me than them. She gestured at the soldiers behind them, at the 10,000 wolves who'd chosen to stand with their king instead of running, who deserved to see tomorrow even if it cost everything she had. That was the thing about real power that King spent lifetimes learning. It wasn't about domination or control. It was about the willingness to burn yourself down so others could survive. Selene had understood that instinctively from the moment she'd accepted the crown, had known that being queen meant becoming the shield between her people and every threat that wanted them dead. The enemy commander called for retreat. Too late. The bonfire had spread through their ranks like wildfire through dry timber. Men were abandoning their posts, running, trying to escape flames that followed them no matter how fast they moved. The organized army of 40,000 had become a panicked mob in under 10 minutes. Kaelthorn felt the moment the bond between Selene and the land shifted. The magic she was channeling wasn't just coming from her anymore. It was pulling from the earth itself, from the ancient bloodlines buried in the soil, from every wolf who'd ever sworn loyalty to this kingdom. She'd become a conduit for power that made individual strength irrelevant, and it was tearing her apart. Her knees buckled. Kaelthorn caught her before she hit the ground. The bonfire flickered but didn't die. Even unconscious, she was still channeling, still feeding the flames that were turning the battlefield into a graveyard. He pressed his hand to her belly, felt the twins fighting each other, felt their heartbeats stuttering and uneven. They were dying. All three of them were dying, because Selene had chosen to save an army instead of protecting herself. Kaelthorn looked up at Gareth. End this. Now. His second didn't question, just raised his sword and gave the order. The 10,000 wolves behind them surged forward into what remained of the enemy forces. Not to fight, to accept surrender, to capture whoever was still alive and breathing. The battle was over. They'd won. At a price Kaelthorn couldn't afford to pay. He gathered Selene into his arms and ran. The bonfire still blazed across the battlefield, but it was weakening, flickering like a candle in wind. He could feel her life force guttering through the bond. The healers were positioned 3 miles back. He covered the distance in wolf form, faster than any horse. Desperate in a way that had nothing to do with kingdoms or crowns, and everything to do with the woman whose heartbeat was fading against his chest. When he reached the medical tents, he shifted back to human and kicked open the nearest door. The head healer took one look at Selene, and her face went pale. Get her on the table. Now! Kaelthorn laid her down as gently as he could. Selene's eyes fluttered open. Gold light still burned in her pupils. The bonfire hadn't released her yet, was still trying to feed through a body that had nothing left to give. The twins, she whispered, are still fighting. Good. She managed a weak smile. They get that from you. From us. Her hand found his, squeezed with almost no strength. Did we win? Yes. How bad? The enemy is broken, scattered. They won't regroup. And our people? Still standing. Because of you. Selene's eyes drifted closed. Then it was worth it. Don't you dare. Kaelthorn's voice came out raw. Don't you dare decide this was worth dying for. Someone had to pay the price. Not you. Never you. The healer pushed him aside. Your Majesty, I need space to work. Kaelthorn stepped back but didn't leave. Couldn't leave. Just stood there watching healers swarm around his wife, while the bond between them flickered like a flame about to go dark. This was what happened when you built something real in a world designed to destroy anything it couldn't control. You paid for every inch of progress with blood and sacrifice and the parts of yourself you could never get back. Selene had understood that cost better than anyone, had looked at the scales and decided some things were worth burning for. He'd spent 30 years as king learning to make impossible choices. She'd learned it in 6 months and surpassed him. The head healer worked in focused silence, hands moving over Selene's swollen belly, pressing, checking. Her expression gave nothing away, but Kaelthorn could read the tension in her shoulders. Something was wrong. The twins' heartbeats, the healer said quietly. They're irregular. Can you stabilize them? I'm trying. But the bonfire is still active. It's feeding on her and them both. Until it releases, we can't... Then make it release. It's ancient magic, Your Majesty. I don't have that kind of power. Find someone who does. She met his eyes. There is no one. The bonfire answers to bloodline, to the bond between you. It won't listen to anyone else. Kaelthorn looked down at Selene, at the golden marks covering her skin, at the light still pulsing beneath the surface. The bonfire had woken because their bond was strong enough to call it, which meant He was the only one who could send it back to sleep. He placed both hands on her belly, felt the twins thrashing, felt the magic burning through her veins like acid. Then he opened the bond as wide as it would go. The pain hit him like a physical blow. Everything Selene had been carrying for the last hour flooded through the connection, the exhaustion, the agony, the slow death of channeling more power than any body could survive. Kaelthorn absorbed it all, pulled it into himself until his own heart was stuttering, until his vision blurred and his legs gave out and he was kneeling beside the table holding on to consciousness by sheer will. The Bondfire recognized him, recognized the bond. And finally, mercifully, it began to fade. The golden light dimmed. Selene's breathing evened out. The twins settled into a rhythm that sounded almost normal. Kaelthorn collapsed. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Selene's hand reaching for his. He woke 3 days later. The room was quiet. Clean light filtered through windows he didn't recognize. His body felt like it had been beaten with hammers and left for dead. But he was alive. Someone stirred beside the bed. Selene sat in a chair pulled close. She looked terrible, pale and drawn with circles under her eyes, dark enough to be bruises. But she was awake, breathing, real. The twins? Still cooking. The healer says another month at least. Kaelthorn tried to sit up and his entire body screamed protest. Selene pressed a hand to his chest. Don't. You nearly died pulling that stunt. So did you. Which makes us even. Not even close. You held an army at bay with magic that should have killed you in minutes, and you took the backlash that would have finished the job. She leaned forward. Her gray eyes were fierce. Don't ever do that again. Which part? Any of it. I can't lose you. Funny. I was about to say the same thing. They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing, just existing in the same space without the immediate threat of death hanging over them. Finally, Selene spoke. How bad was the aftermath? The enemy lost 30,000. Most of them burned. The survivors surrendered. And our people? 2,000 casualties. Could have been worse. It's still too many. Kaelthorn nodded. Every death was too many, but they'd chosen to fight, had stood against overwhelming odds because they believed in something worth protecting. That belief had cost blood. It always did. What happens now? Selene asked. Now we rebuild. For real this time. The noble houses won't accept it. The ones who marched against us are broken. The ones who didn't will fall in line or face the same fate. That's tyranny. That's survival. We gave them a chance to change peacefully. They chose war. Now they live with the consequences. Selene studied his face. You've changed. So have you. Fair. She stood and moved to the window. Outside, the city of Velmora was visible in the distance. Still standing, still breathing, damaged but not destroyed. I keep thinking about what it cost, she said quietly. All those lives, all that destruction. Was it worth it? You tell me. I don't know. I thought I did on the battlefield. But now that the fire's gone and I can actually think again, I'm not sure. Kaelthorn pushed himself upright despite the pain, walked to stand beside her. The truth is, we'll never know. We made the choice we had to make in that moment. Whether it was the right one doesn't change that it was the only one we could live with. That's not very comforting. It's not supposed to be. Real power comes with real cost, and you don't get to pretend otherwise. He put his arm around her shoulders, careful of her belly. But here's what I do know, he continued. Because of what you did, 10,000 wolves who would have died are still alive. Because we stood together, this kingdom has a chance to become something better than what it was. That's not nothing. It's also not everything. No, but it's enough. Selene leaned into him. They stood like that for a long time. Two people who'd burned their way through conspiracy and war and impossible odds, who'd paid prices they were still calculating, who were learning that survival didn't feel like victory as much as it felt like exhaustion and relief mixed with grief for what was lost along the way. Eventually she spoke again. What do we tell our children? The truth. That we fought for them. That we chose them over everything else. That love isn't always enough, but it's what you build on when nothing else is left. And if they ask whether it was worth it, we tell them to decide for themselves when they're old enough to understand what we sacrificed. Selene's hand went to her belly. The twins shifted under her touch. 8 more weeks, and they'd be born into a kingdom that was still standing, still breathing, changed in ways no one could have predicted. That would have to be enough. The coronation happened 6 weeks later. Not the rushed political necessity that Morel's had been. This was deliberate, planned, a statement that the kingdom was moving forward under new terms. They held it in the same throne room where everything had fallen apart. The anchor symbols had been scrubbed from the floor. The broken throne replaced with something simpler, less ornate, more functional. Thousands packed the hall to witness. Kaelthorn stood beside Selene as the High Court formally recognized their marriage, formally acknowledged the Bondfire as a legitimate basis for succession, formally crowned her queen not through political maneuvering but through power that predated their legal system. Chief Justice Aldrich performed the ceremony with visible reluctance. When it was done, Selene wore the crown, and the kingdom bent the knee, not out of fear, out of recognition that something fundamental had shifted. The old system where noble bloodlines controlled everything was cracking. It would take years to fully dismantle, maybe decades. But the foundation had been laid and everyone in that room could feel it. After the ceremony, they held court. Representatives from every surviving noble house came to swear fealty. Some meant it. Others were going through the motions while they figured out how to adapt. Kaelthorn accepted them all and made mental notes about which ones would need watching. The last to approach was a young woman from House Corvin. Minor nobility. Her family had lost everything when they'd sided with Morel. She knelt before the throne. "Your Majesty, I come seeking mercy." Kaelthorn studied her. "For what crime?" "My house supported the conspiracy. We raised arms against you. By law, we've forfeited everything. You have." She lifted her chin. "Then I ask not for my family's lands or titles, just for the chance to prove we can be loyal. Why should I believe that? Because we learned what happens when power is the only thing that matters. Because my brother died in that pass, and I don't want his death to mean nothing." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. Selene leaned forward. "What would you do with that chance? Whatever you ask. Rebuild, serve, learn. Just don't make us disappear." Kaelthorn and Selene exchanged a look. The bond between them carried a wordless conversation, a weighing of risk against potential, of mercy against justice. Finally, Kaelthorn spoke. "House Corvin is stripped of lands and titles, but you personally are granted a position in the new administration we're building. Prove your loyalty and we'll discuss restoration. Betray us, and there won't be enough left of your bloodline to bury." The girl's eyes widened. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Don't thank me yet. You're about to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." She smiled through tears. "I can live with that." She retreated and another petitioner stepped forward. The court continued for hours. By the time it ended, Kaelthorn's head was pounding and Selene looked ready to fall asleep in the throne. But they'd done it. Held court as a mated pair, made decisions together, shown the kingdom what partnership looked like when it wasn't just political theater. That night they returned to their private chambers. Selene kicked off her formal shoes and groaned. "I'm never standing for 6 hours again. You'll do it next week when we hold court in the Southern Territories." "Don't remind me." She lowered herself onto the bed with the careful movements of someone extremely pregnant. The twins were due any day now. The healers had her on strict orders not to channel the Bondfire anymore, not to do anything that might trigger early labor. Selene was ignoring most of those orders. Kaelthorn sat beside her. "How are they?" "Restless. I think they know something's about to change. Everything's about to change." He placed his hand on her belly, felt the twins shifting, felt the future moving beneath his palm. In 2 weeks they'd be parents. In 2 months the kingdom would settle into whatever new normal they'd created. In 2 years they might actually know if any of this had been worth the cost. But right now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, scarred, exhausted, still standing. Selene's hand covered his. "Do you regret it?" "Which part?" "Any of it. The bond. The war. The choice to burn everything down instead of walking away." Kaelthorn thought about it, really thought, about the night he'd been forced to crown Morel, about the 6 months he'd spent dying without Selene, about finding her in that border village and dragging her back into danger, about watching her nearly kill herself to save an army, about every impossible choice and brutal consequence that had led them here. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it. I'd do it all again, even knowing what it cost. especially knowing what it cost. Because the alternative was losing you, and I've learned I'd rather burn the world down than live in one without you in it." Selene was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. "That's deeply unhealthy." "Probably. We should work on that. After the twins are born, deal." She kissed him, slow and deep. The kind of kiss that tasted like promises and survival and the strange relief of making it through something that should have killed you both. When they broke apart, Selene rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, the city was settling into night. Guards changed shifts, markets closed. People returned to homes they weren't sure they'd still have tomorrow, but were grateful to find standing. The kingdom was healing, slowly, painfully, with scars that would never fully fade, but healing. Kaelthorn held his pregnant wife and felt the bond between them pulse with something that might have been peace. They'd torn through conspiracy and war and the collapse of everything they'd known. They'd survived by refusing to break, and now they got to figure out what came after survival. The twins were born on a night when lightning split the sky. Selene's water broke during dinner. She looked down at the puddle spreading across the floor and said, "Well, that's inconvenient." Then the contractions hit. Kaelthorn had faced down armies, had stared at death more times than he could count, had torn through enemies without hesitation. Watching Selene in labor terrified him more than any battle. She was in pain, real pain that he couldn't fight or fix or take from her. All he could do was hold her hand and watch her breathe through contractions that were tearing her apart from the inside. The healers worked in controlled chaos, checking, preparing, making sure everything was ready for a birth that carried more risk than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Twin births were dangerous for normal wolves. For someone who'd channeled Bondfire while pregnant, the odds got significantly worse. Hours passed. Selene's screams echoed through the palace. She'd refused any pain management that might affect the twins. Just gritted her teeth and endured while her body did what it was designed to do. Kaelthorn stayed beside her the entire time. When she squeezed his hand hard enough to break bones, he didn't flinch. When she cursed him for putting her through this, he took it. When she looked at him with eyes that held more pain than anyone should have to carry, he met her gaze and poured everything he had through the bond. "You can do this. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Just a little longer. I hate you. I know, this is your fault, completely. If I survive this, I'm never letting you touch me again. We'll renegotiate later." She almost laughed. Then another contraction hit and she screamed. The first twin came at dawn. A boy. Screaming with the kind of fury that said he was not happy about being forced into the world. The healers cleaned him quickly and wrapped him in cloth. Kaelthorn stared at his son, at the tiny fists and scrunched face, at the life he and Selene had created together. "One more," the head healer said. "Push." Selene was beyond exhausted. Her hair stuck to her face with sweat. Blood soaked the sheets, but she gathered what was left of her strength and pushed. The second twin came 10 minutes later. A girl. Smaller than her brother, but with eyes that opened immediately and fixed on Selene with an intensity that was almost unsettling. The healer placed both babies on Selene's chest. She looked down at them and burst into tears. Not from pain, from relief and joy and the overwhelming reality of holding the two lives she'd nearly died protecting. Kaelthorn knelt beside the bed, put his arms around all three of them. His family, his entire world condensed into this single moment. "They're perfect," Selene whispered. "They're ours. What do we name them?" She looked up at him. "We talked about this." "I know. But now that they're here, I want to make sure." Kaelthorn studied his children. The boy already looked like he was planning ways to cause trouble. The girl watched everything with the kind of focus that suggested she'd be running the kingdom before she could walk. "The boy is Theron," he said. "After my father." "And the girl?" Selene thought for a moment, then smiled. "Lyra. After the first queen who ever ruled this kingdom without a king beside her. Perfect." They spent the rest of the morning just existing as a family. No kingdom, no responsibilities, no wars or conspiracies or impossible choices. Just two exhausted parents and their newborn twins learning how to breathe in the same space. Eventually, the reality of ruling would crash back down. There were still noble houses to manage, still a kingdom to rebuild, still enemies who'd gone underground but not disappeared, But that could wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was this: the family they'd burned the world to protect, the future they'd built from ashes and refusal to surrender, the proof that some bonds couldn't be broken no matter how hard the world tried. 5 years later, Kaelthorn stood on the cliffs overlooking Velmora and watched his children play. Theron was chasing his sister through the grass with the single-minded determination of someone who'd been told he couldn't catch her. Lyra kept glancing back and laughing. She was faster, but she let him get close enough to think he had a chance. They were already developing the dynamic that would define them. Theron was physical, direct, preferred to solve problems by hitting them until they broke. Lyra was tactical, calculating, could manipulate her brother into doing exactly what she wanted while making him think it was his idea. Both of them carried the Bondfire. It had manifested early, golden marks appearing on their skin before they turned 3. The healers said it was unprecedented. Children that young shouldn't have been able to access ancient magic. But Theron and Lyra weren't normal children. They were the first generation born to a true mate bond in over 300 years. Born carrying power that had been extinct and was now rebuilding itself through them. The kingdom was still figuring out what that meant. Selene appeared beside him. She moved quieter than she used to. Pregnancy had changed her body in permanent ways, but she wore the changes like battle scars. Proof she'd survived something that should have killed her. "They're going to be a handful when they're older," she said. "They're already a handful." "Fair." She slipped her hand into his. 5 years of marriage, and the gesture still felt like coming home. The bond between them had settled into something comfortable. Still intense, but no longer burning, more like banked coals that could flare to life when needed. "How was the council meeting?" he asked. "Productive. House Thrain agreed to the land redistribution. House Morven is still fighting, but they'll cave eventually. And the Southern Territories? Stable. The new governors are working out better than expected." Kaelthorn nodded. The kingdom had changed dramatically in 5 years. They'd broken the old power structures and rebuilt from scratch, given commoners paths to power that didn't require noble birth, redistributed land based on merit instead of bloodline. It wasn't perfect. There were still pockets of resistance, still nobles who thought the old ways were better. But the tide had turned, and everyone knew it. The future belonged to people willing to earn their place instead of inheriting it. Theron finally caught Lyra, and they tumbled into the grass laughing. Kaelthorn watched them and felt something close to peace. This was what they'd fought for, not crowns or power or political dominance. This, the chance for their children to grow up in a kingdom that valued them for who they were instead of what bloodline they carried. The chance to build something better than what came before. It had cost everything. Blood and sacrifice and parts of themselves they'd never get back. But standing here watching his children play while his kingdom rebuilt itself into something worth protecting, Kaelthorn couldn't regret it. Some things were worth burning for, some bonds were worth dying to protect, and some futures were worth every impossible choice it took to reach them. Selene leaned her head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about? How far we've come. And how far we still have to go." Always the optimist. "Someone has to balance out your pessimism." She elbowed him gently. "I'm realistic." "You say realistic." "I say pessimistic." Theron ran up to them. His face was flushed and happy. "Papa, can we go to the training grounds?" "Not today." "Why not?" "Because your mother and I actually want to enjoy a quiet afternoon." "That's boring. Life is boring sometimes. Get used to it." Lyra appeared beside her brother. She studied Kaelthorn with eyes that were too knowing for a 5-year-old. "You're thinking about the war again." "I'm not. You get that look when you think about the war, like you're seeing ghosts." Kaelthorn glanced at Selene. She shrugged. "She's not wrong." He knelt down so he was eye level with his daughter. "What do you know about the war?" "Just what people say. That you and Mama fought an army to protect us. That the kingdom almost died. That everything changed. That's the short version. Is the long version scary?" "Very." Lyra considered this. "Then I want to hear it when I'm older." "Why?" "Because if we're going to rule this kingdom someday, we should know what it cost." Kaelthorn looked at Selene. She was smiling. Their daughter had just casually announced she planned to rule. At 5 years old. with the kind of certainty that suggested she'd already made plans and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Definitely his child. Definitely theirs. When you're older, he agreed, we'll tell you everything. Promise? Promise. Lyra nodded like they'd just sealed a treaty. Then she grabbed Theron's hand. Come on, let's go find Uncle Gareth. The children ran off toward the palace. Kaelthorn stood and watched them disappear. Uncle Gareth was probably going to regret ever agreeing to babysit. Theron and Lyra together were a force of nature, but that was a problem for later. Right now, he had everything he needed. A mate who'd walked through fire beside him. A kingdom that was healing. Children who carried the future in their blood. And the quiet knowledge that they'd survived something that should have destroyed them. Not because they were stronger than everyone else, but because they'd refused to break. Even when breaking would have been easier. Even when surrender would have saved them pain. They'd chosen each other over everything else and built a kingdom worth protecting on that foundation. Selene squeezed his hand. Ready to go back? Not yet. Let's stay here a little longer. Avoiding responsibility? Savoring peace. She smiled. Fair enough. They stood on the cliffs as the sun began to set. Golden light painted everything the same color as the bonfire that had saved them. That had nearly killed them. That had become the symbol of everything they'd fought to protect. In the distance, Velmora glowed. Not with fire this time. With life. And for the first time in 5 years, Kaelthorn let himself believe it might actually last. Not forever. Nothing lasted forever. But long enough. Long enough for his children to grow up safe. Long enough for the kingdom to stabilize. Long enough for the wounds they'd all carried to scar over and become stories instead of open pain. That would have to be enough. Because in the end, survival wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to quit, even when quitting made sense. It was about building something worth protecting and paying whatever price that required. It was about looking at impossible odds and deciding they didn't matter as much as the person standing beside you. Kaelthorn pulled Selene close and kissed the top of her head. She'd saved him in ways that had nothing to do with magic or power. She'd taught him that strength wasn't about domination. It was about the willingness to burn yourself down so others could survive, and then rebuild from the ashes when the burning was done. That was the real lesson of the bonfire, not that it could destroy, but that it could forge something unbreakable from what remained. They walked back to the palace together as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Behind them, the cliffs stood empty. Ahead, their children were probably terrorizing Gareth. And somewhere between those 2 points was everything they'd fought for, everything they'd survived, everything they'd become, king and queen, mates, parents, survivors. The rest would be history. But right now, in this moment, they were just 2 people who'd refused to let the world break them, and that was more than enough.